History often turns on moments no one sees coming. A single winter, a single battlefield, a single decision made by a ruler who refuses to bow. And sometimes those moments explode into something far bigger, the rise of a new kind of power. Tonight, we travel to the gates of medieval Delhi, where the world's most feared army, the Mongols, expected another easy conquest. Instead, they met something entirely new, a disciplined war machine forged not from steel or elephants, but from paper, money, and a revolution in how a kingdom wielded its power. This is the story of how Delhi rewrote the rules of war, and how one battle changed the destiny of India. In the freezing winter of 1299, a Mongol host led by Kutlug Khwaja thundered south toward Delhi, the beating heart of northern India. They had already smashed kingdoms from Persia to Transoxiana, leaving ruin in their wake. Now, nothing appeared to stand between them and one of the richest cities on earth. Even the Sultan's own advisors begged him to fall back behind Delhi's walls and pray the storm would blow past. But Sultan Alauddin Khalji was not like the rulers before him. He had something entirely different, something no monarch in the region had ever attempted. And when the two armies collided at the plains of Kili, just outside the capital, the Mongols opened the fight with their usual terrifying speed. But this time, they smashed into a system that did not shatter. Delhi's troops held firm, struck back with discipline, and for the first time in Indian history, cracked the myth of Mongol invincibility. People today picture elephants, banners snapping in the wind, and the thunder of cavalry. Yet Delhi's real secret weapon wasn't marching on the battlefield at all. So here's the question. How did a paper-based system outmaneuver the fastest army on Earth? Why did the Mongols, masters of mobility and surprise, stumble here? And how did one battle redefine India's entire idea of power? Let's uncover it. The relationship between the Delhi Sultanate and the Mongols didn't begin with open war. It began almost by accident in the 1220s, when Genghis Khan pursued a fleeing Khwarezmian prince across Central Asia. That desperate flight carried the prince all the way to the frontiers of India, and that was the first time Mongol riders brushed against Delhi's world. For decades afterward, little happened. The Mongols were too busy swallowing China, Persia, and everything else that dared resist them. But by the late 13th century, a real threat finally emerged. This time, it came from the Chagatai Khanate, one of the four great fragments of Genghis Khan's empire. They found themselves squeezed on all sides, the Golden Horde to the west, the Ilkhanate in Persia, and the Yuan dynasty in China. Only one direction remained open, south, into the Indian subcontinent. And that's when Delhi's long struggle truly began. Before the rising Khalji dynasty seized power, Sultan Alauddin had already sensed what was coming. He wasn't the sort to sit back and hope invaders stayed quiet. Instead, he created what he called a frontier defense of blood and iron, a line of fortresses along the Beas River in northwestern India, supplied and garrisoned year-round. It was the medieval version of a defensive wall built to halt nomadic invasions. It worked, but at a brutal cost. In 1285, the Mongols struck those defenses at the Battle of the Beas River. Delhi's army managed to force them back, but victory came covered in grief. Balban's own son, Prince Muhammad, fell in the fighting. His death was more than a personal tragedy. It was a warning that resisting the Mongols would always demand sacrifice. Then came the Khaljis, and everything intensified. Sultan Alauddin Khalji faced another invasion in 1292, turning it back, but failing to end the cycle. Between 1296 and 1297, the Chagatai launched even more raids, no longer small incursions, but something sharper, more deliberate. Their intentions were shifting. That change became undeniable in 1299. Kutlug Khwaja, hardened by years of Central Asian campaigns, led a massive force directly toward Delhi. This was no plundering raid. It was a full invasion aimed at conquest. They intended to rule the capital itself. You can see it in their tactics. Instead of wasting time on towns or forts, they ignored everything and drove straight for Delhi. Classic Mongol strategy: strike fast, strike deep, and crush your enemies before they can react. But there was something they hadn't counted on. The constant chaos of Mongol warfare in Central Asia had pushed waves of refugees southward: soldiers, craftsmen, entire families. Many found safety in Delhi, a thriving Muslim center and one of the most secure cities in Asia. Among them were hardened cavalrymen and veteran archers who had actually fought the Mongols before. Men who had survived the best horsemen in the world now offered their blades to Delhi. This transformed the Sultan's army. It became more than a regional force. It became something that could challenge the Mongols directly, rider against rider, bow against bow. So when Alauddin Khalji claimed the throne, he didn't inherit just a kingdom. He inherited an army already experienced in battling his greatest enemy. That was his hidden advantage, and he built upon it relentlessly. But such an army, professional, large, always combat-ready, devoured money. Feeding thousands of troops, maintaining horses, supplying arrows and armor, paying salaries. It could drain a treasury in months. So Alauddin made a radical choice. He militarized the entire administration. It began with one principle: central control. Before him, sultans had relied heavily on provincial nobles, men who commanded local armies and collected taxes, known as ikta holders. In theory, they served the sultan. In reality, they behaved like small kings. When Mongols appeared at the frontier, these nobles might answer the call, or they might refuse, depending on their own ambitions. Alauddin refused to live under their shadow. He dismantled their power by doing something extraordinary for 13th century India. He built a permanent, centrally controlled, standing army loyal only to the throne. Tens of thousands of professional soldiers, cavalry, infantry, and war elephants, all paid directly by the state. Always trained, always ready. No more waiting for regional lords to muster support. And here's the brilliant twist. Instead of granting land, Alauddin paid his troops in cash. That meant loyalty flowed toward Delhi, not toward provincial aristocrats. It also gutted the corruption and favoritism tied to land revenue. Overnight, the center of power snapped back into the Sultan's hands. But paying that enormous army in silver every month created a whole new problem. How do you make sure every coin you spend actually buys real military power? How do you stop an army from rotting from the inside? This was where Alauddin's organizational brilliance truly showed. He introduced two reforms that feel astonishingly modern for the 13th century: the dag and the chera. The dag, literally a branding system, marked every horse belonging to the state. Commanders had a habit of claiming pay for elite, war-ready mounts while sneaking in half-trained, weak animals. It was an old, lucrative scam that drained the treasury. The dag ended it instantly. Only horses with an official brand, inspected, tested, and approved, could be presented for service. It may sound like dull administration, but it changed the cavalry completely. And the cavalry mattered more than anything. In medieval warfare, especially against the Mongols, the greatest horsemen in human history, your survival depended on the strength of your mounts. By standardizing and protecting his horse stock, Alauddin ensured his riders could keep pace with Mongol speed and endurance. Then came the chera system, the face. Every soldier's physical identity was recorded in detail: height, build, complexion, scars, unique marks. It was the medieval equivalent of issuing a photo ID. Why go to such lengths? Because commanders exploited the system shamelessly, enrolling fabricated soldiers, swapping in raw recruits, or collecting pay for men who didn't exist. With the chera, every soldier could be verified. It was an anti-corruption weapon, and a guarantee that the paper army on the Sultan's ledgers matched the flesh-and-blood force on the battlefield. By the time these reforms settled in, Alauddin commanded something India had never seen: an army that was absolutely real. Every rider, every sword, every horse accounted for. The cavalry formed the core, supported by disciplined infantry and elephant corps. Even within the cavalry, there were two classes, the Akaspa, who kept one horse, and the Duaspa, who maintained two. That second mount was the secret to long-range endurance. When one horse began to tire, the rider simply switched to the other, a method that slowly closed the gap between Delhi's movement and the legendary swiftness of the Mongols. But Alauddin didn't stop at tightening military discipline. He turned economics itself into a weapon. His battles were fought not only with steel and hooves, but with grain markets and account books, and that is what made his system revolutionary. Let's begin with the central dilemma. Alauddin commanded one of the largest standing armies in medieval India, tens of thousands of professionals and hundreds of elephants. But here was the paradox. How do you keep a force that large fed, armed, and loyal without draining the treasury dry? Alauddin's answer was unexpected. He intentionally kept soldiers' salaries low, far lower than earlier rulers had paid. On the surface, it looked unfair, even unsustainable. But he wasn't thinking in terms of wages. He was thinking in terms of purchasing power. Alauddin realized something simple and brilliant. It didn't matter how much silver you paid a soldier if the price of daily necessities kept rising. So instead of increasing salaries, he attacked the cost of living itself. This became the foundation of his famous market regulations, the Diwan-i-Riyasat. He set maximum prices on almost every essential good: grain, vegetables, meat, fabrics, fodder, even horses. The logic was clean and ruthless. If prices stayed low, even a small salary could sustain a family. A cavalryman earning modest pay could still afford wheat, barley, fodder, and cloth. During normal wartime, prices would explode, famine, failed monsoons, merchant hoarding, but under Alauddin, the price of wheat remained fixed. It didn't matter if traders tried to manipulate the market. The Sultan froze prices. Soldiers could live steadily, and that stability became a strategic advantage. Alauddin could plan long campaigns knowing exactly what it would cost to sustain his forces, month after month, year after year. No sudden inflation, no shortages, no greedy merchants holding supplies for ransom. He enforced this system with an iron fist. Traders who hoarded, cheated, or gouged prices faced brutal punishment. Inspectors monitored markets, audited warehouses, and ensured no one tampered with the supply. And the state went further. It built enormous government granaries. During lean years, the Sultanate released grain to stabilize prices. During plentiful years, it bought grain to prevent inflation. The army, of course, ate first. No rationing for soldiers. Alauddin had created something almost unheard of for the medieval world, a state-controlled supply chain. With this centralized economic machine, he could maintain huge defenses indefinitely. The Mongols, on the other hand, could not. Their armies thrived on fast raids, grazing lands, and rapid resupply. They needed open pastures and quick victories. But when they entered northern India, everything they relied on collapsed. The lush, grazing lands they expected were gone, harvested, evacuated, or locked under the Sultan's control. Their horses, the very source of their power, began to weaken. They had walked into a deliberate resource denial trap. Everywhere they turned, granaries belonged to Delhi. Fodder fields were stripped clean. Villages were empty or tightly administered by state agents. The Mongols, for the first time, could not live off the land. They were forced into a long, grinding logistical fight, something their entire system was never designed for. Meanwhile, reports began flooding into Delhi. Kutlug Khwaja and his deputy, Tamar Bua, had crossed the frontier and pitched camp barely 10 kilometers from the capital at a place called Kili, practically within eyesight of the city. Alauddin's advisors begged him to retreat behind the walls. But he refused. He would meet the Mongols in the open. Kili wasn't merely about defending Delhi. It was the proving ground for his entire centralized war machine. If he backed down, everything he had built, the low salary system, the price controls, the anti-corruption reforms, would seem like a failure. So he mobilized what historians estimate to be around 70,000 soldiers and an astonishing 700 war elephants, marching them toward the Mongol camp for a battle that would decide the fate of northern India. The Mongol force at Kili was likely 50 to 60,000 strong, smaller than Delhi's army, but hardened by decades of steppe warfare and terrifyingly fast. For the era, this was a massive host, and it represented a serious test of Delhi's rising military system. What truly set Alauddin apart was not just the size of his army, but the way he organized it. He arranged his forces into 5 coordinated divisions, like 5 moving parts of a single disciplined machine. On the left wing stood Nusrat Khan. On the right, the fiery commander Zafar Khan. Alauddin himself held the center, anchoring the formation. The vanguard, the troops who would meet the first Mongol assault, was led by Ayaz Khan. And in reserve, positioned cleverly behind the left wing, stood Ulu Khan, ready to plug holes or strike a decisive blow wherever the line wavered. That decision to place reserves behind the weaker flank speaks volumes about Alauddin's instincts as a battlefield strategist. He also deployed his elephants not merely as weapons, but as moving fortresses. Each cavalry division stood behind a row of armored war elephants, and behind them waited infantry with bows, spears, and shields. If you picture that, a line of colossal elephants shielding dense ranks of soldiers, you can instantly see how this crushed the Mongols' traditional approach. Their strength lay in speed, in encirclement, in sweeping around their opponents. But at Kili, they had nowhere to maneuver. Alauddin had chosen his ground with precision. One side was pressed against a thick forest, the other against the Yamuna River. It was a perfect choke point. The Mongols, who relied on vast open plains to surround their enemies, were trapped in a narrow space. Their cavalry's legendary flanking movements were smothered. Alauddin wasn't just defending Delhi. He was defending his entire political and economic system. His choice to stand here was as symbolic as it was strategic. The battle quickly became a contest of cavalry, which made perfect sense. Both armies relied on their horsemen, but the two sides used them in very different ways. Alauddin's cavalry was a mixed arms corps, mounted archers firing at range, and lancers built for shot combat. Delhi's lancers actually had the advantage in close combat. They wore heavier armor and wielded longer spears than most Mongol riders. In a straight-up clash, they had the edge. But the Mongols rarely accepted a direct fight. Their deadliest tactic was deception, and at Kili they used one of their favorite tricks, the feigned retreat. One of Alauddin's fiercest commanders, Zafar Khan, fell right into it. The Mongol general Hylak pulled his force back, pretending to flee. Zafar Khan, driven by bravery and perhaps a trace of pride, gave chase without waiting for the Sultan's command. He pursued them for nearly 18 kos, about 35 kilometers. Then the trap closed. The Mongols wheeled around and struck from all sides. Zafar Khan and his men fought savagely, inflicting heavy losses, but they were completely encircled. By the end, Zafar Khan lay dead among his soldiers. You might expect Alauddin to honor him as a hero, but he didn't, at least not publicly. Instead, he condemned Zafar Khan's disobedience. For Alauddin, discipline mattered more than individual valor. His army wasn't built on feudal heroics or personal glory. It was built on organization, obedience, and central control. One impulsive commander could fracture the entire structure. Zafar Khan's reckless pursuit nearly exposed the left flank and threatened the whole army. This is the critical turning point. Delhi's real weapon wasn't elephants or swords. It was cohesion under pressure. Even after losing one of his best generals, Alauddin kept his composure. His central command held. The formation stayed intact. His reserves remained poised. Kutlug Khwaja, seeing Zafar Khan's wing destroyed, believed the moment had come for a decisive breakthrough. He launched a furious assault on Alauddin's center, but his wings failed to keep up. The Mongol advance stalled, and the center became exposed. This was the moment Alauddin had prepared for. Ulu Khan, commanding the reserves, swung forward from the left. Because Alauddin had placed his reserves behind the vulnerable flank, they were perfectly positioned to strike. Ulu Khan slammed into the side of the Mongol center, turning their assault back upon them. The battle dragged on for days. But Delhi's numerical strength, its mixed formations, and Alauddin's unwavering control gradually broke the Mongol will. Men, horses, and morale drained away. Then came the decisive blow. Kutlug Khwaja was wounded, perhaps fatally. Some accounts claim he died shortly after the battle. The Mongol command structure collapsed. With dwindling supplies and no leader to rally them, they withdrew. Kili didn't end Mongol invasions forever, but it did something far more powerful. It shattered the myth that the Mongols could not be stopped in India. For the first time, they had met an organized state that matched them not only in courage, but in planning. But history rarely grants victory without a new test. Just 4 years later, in October 1303, the Mongols returned, this time under Taragai. And now Delhi stood at its weakest. Alauddin's armies were scattered. One force limped home from the brutal siege of Chittor. Another marched south toward Varungal in the Deccan. For once, Delhi was nearly undefended. Alauddin raced back to the capital, exhausted and desperate. When he arrived, he found disaster. Monsoon rains had ruined weapons and armor. Horses were dead or lame from long marches. Supplies were thin. The empire that had stood tall at Kili now faced ruin. Taragai's Mongols swept into India and camped within 10 kilometers of Delhi. Panic erupted. Prices soared. People fled. Everyone looked to the Sultan for salvation, but he had no army ready to fight. So Alauddin made a very different choice. Instead of marching out, he fortified himself inside Siri, a new fort still under construction. Its location mattered more than its walls. Siri was protected by the Yamuna River, dense forest, and the old city of Delhi. Only the northern side lay open, so Alauddin ordered a deep moat dug and reinforced it with a wooden palisade. Workers tore doors and beams from Delhi's own homes to build it. This improvised barrier became the city's lifeline. Behind it, Alauddin arranged his remaining soldiers, backed by a front line of 5 heavily armored elephants, living bulwarks capable of breaking any cavalry charge. The Mongols, trapped outside these defenses, found themselves facing obstacles instead of open ground. For more than 2 months, Taragai's forces besieged Delhi. They burned the countryside. They looted villages. They tried to bait Alauddin into open battle. He refused. He waited. He let time do the killing. The Chagatai Mongols were not siege specialists. They had no catapults, no engineers, no heavy equipment. Worse for them, Alauddin had already stripped the surrounding region of food and fodder. The Mongols found nothing. Their horses starved. Disease spread. Men weakened. And after 2 months, they simply broke. They withdrew, not because Alauddin defeated them in open battle, but because they could not outlast the system he had engineered. After the siege, Alauddin took stock. Delhi had survived, but only just. Improvised defenses weren't enough. So he doubled down on fortification. Siri was completed and strengthened. A permanent frontier army was established, a full-time defensive force dedicated to guarding the northwest. A new governor oversaw this system, ensuring future invasions would be stopped long before reaching Delhi. The Mongols would raid again, but they would never again come close to conquering northern India.